Okay. So the only people that are unmuted are, well, it's just myself now, but it was Sarah. So yeah, if we could remain muted during the presentation, that would be good. And that will kind of keep the feedback to a minimum for everybody that's on this presentation. Thank you for joining us today. And we want to welcome you to this opportunity for some continuing education. My name is Stephanie Honeck, and I am the office associate in Henry County, and also the Henry County Master Gardener Coordinator. So I kind of have two roles there. And when we have a uh, agriculture educator, I am also the assistant to the ag educator. And we're in the process right now of hiring a new one because ours just kind of got a great job opportunity and he's living his dream. So we're really happy for him. I Background wise, education wise, I have an associate's degree in landscape and turfgrass management from Owens Community College. And then from there, I worked for, was kind of a strategic plan. I worked for several different landscape companies in bed maintenance, installation, production. I've worked in retail, and all of that kind of led up to a point where I was being asked, I did landscape design for a garden center called Oak Park, which is in Swanton. Some of you have been there. It's a water garden center. And then I had so many people asking me, from my area, which I'm from the Liberty Center area, if I would do landscape designs. And I found myself in a lot of my spare time doing this kind of freelance. And then I decided to open up a garden center in 2007. I started, opened Old Orchard Garden Center and landscape in Napoleon, Ohio. And we had a landscape company for 7 years and a retail garden center. And so during that time, I did a lot of landscape designing as well. And it actually doesn't have to be as hard of a process as I think a lot of people make it. But one of the concerns that we have, of course, would be right plant, right place, which we've all learned through our uh, Master Gardener education. And a lot of the things that we've learned, we can apply here in this program today. Okay, so does anybody have any questions for me before I go to the slides? Okay, and then I'm going to share my screen, and I hope that you can all see it. Okay, so the topic of today's program is landscape design and renovation. And, oh, we have somebody else coming in. There you go. Why am I not at that screen? Okay. So one of the first things that I think about when I am deciding what to do as far as a landscape, how much room do I need? I've had a lot of folks that have taken, just the space between the sidewalk and the house and said, I just want to plant some plants here. Some people say you can have my whole yard. It all depends on what space is available. And then we can kind of go through and decide what we want to do. So how much room do I need? Can you eliminate future maintenance issues by increasing the size of the planting area? One of the things that I've noticed that a lot of people do is they pull out an existing landscape if this is not new construction, and then they want to put landscaping right back into the exact same holes that they pulled plants out of. When you do that, it makes it kind of hard to use any future creativity without basically recreating the same landscape that you just pulled out. Which, if that's what you want to do, then nobody's going to tell you that you're wrong. But maybe we can expand the bed sizes and reduce our amount of maintenance in the future. Anytime we force a plant to grow in an unnatural setting, we are creating maintenance for ourselves. May not be today, may not be 2 years from now, but maybe 5-6 years from now. And we need to take into account what those plants are going to be like in that given time. So can we eliminate any future maintenance issues by increasing the size of the planting area? I've had a lot of people that give me 2 feet between the house and the sidewalk to plant shrubs, and they want something flowering and they want this and they want that. But really, if we're going to take any plants and put it in that 2-foot space, is that really what should happen? And if so, or if not, can we go on the outside of that sidewalk and make a new planting bed that we can maybe give the customer what they're looking for? Is the planting area even suitable for plants? I've had a number of times where I've been asked, especially, and I'm going to use that 2-foot section between the house and the sidewalk. And I'm sure we can all think of someone's house or a commercial property. Maybe it's the dentist office, maybe it's the doctor's office, where you see just a small, narrow planting bed between the building and the sidewalk. And a lot of times people pack a lot in there. Sometimes they're really struggling, and we have to ask ourselves, is that even a suitable planting space for plants? And if so, what kind of plants can we put in there? Sometimes I have noticed that plants really struggle in those narrow places, especially up against a foundation, because topsoil depth may not be very optimal. There could be stone underneath it for drainage to get to the tile to keep the moisture away from the foundation. So the actual depth of the soil, the root base for these plants is really not adequate for what the plants would need. And then if we think about overhangs and such, when we look at a building and it has an overhang, a soffit, where the eave spouts and everything go, if it's overhanging into that space, it almost takes a perfect rain for the water to get to those plants. So in a drought like we've had this year, many plants are probably suffering horribly in those types of situations, which in turn will stress a plant out, make it more susceptible to disease and insect issues that normally a healthy plant can fight off. Sarah, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, perfectly fine.
Okay. If at any point any of you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. There is a point, and since I'm sharing my screen, I can't see it. But if you look at the bottom of your screen, it does say that you can raise your hand, and I'd be very, very happy to answer any questions you have along the way. So one of the things that we need to do is really evaluate the site and see if it's even suitable for plants. And then if it is, what kinds of plants would do better? If it is a really dry situation where things have just died repeatedly, maybe we need to think about some boulders or some artwork or something that may not be living to fill that space, and then come out away from that area and plant some plants. So should a different object be chosen, like a fountain or a statue or a boulder, etc.? And I think that this is a really good question to ask ourselves. We're going to talk about, as we design, we look for hard lines and corners and places for vertical and horizontal plants. But one of the things we need to think about would be, does everything in our landscape need to be a plant? First of all, plants require maintenance. Even in a very low maintenance landscape, they do require some maintenance at some point. There's going to be leaves that blow in there that have to be cleaned out. There may be weeds that grow up through those plants. You may get one branch that shoots off for some reason that needs to be pruned, but maybe a fountain or a statue or some sort of natural stone would be appropriate for a focal point or even in those places. I think sometimes we forget that those are options when we look at landscapes. If maintenance is required to keep the mature plant inside the planting bed, seriously reconsider the size of the planting area or the plant selection. So what I kind of alluded to at the beginning was, I think people have a tendency to pull out an old landscape and put the same things back in, or similar. It's going to have a similar feel or the same size. And we say, okay, well, what were the problems with the last landscape? Well, I just felt like I had to prune everything all the time. Everything, just got out of control. Then the last thing we want to do is to recreate the same problem again. So would increasing the size of the planting area have taken care of a lot of the problems that we had in the previous landscape? Chances are the answer would be yes. Most people tend to put plants right up against the house, which in turn makes the house look smaller. When you take a landscape and you spread it out and you pull those plants away from the house, and the landscaping is larger and more in proportion with the home and balanced with the home overall looks larger, and a larger home is worth more. So if this is for the opportunity to sell a home, to have your house be appraised at a higher value at some point, or even just for lower maintenance, a larger landscaping sometimes is much lower maintenance than a small landscape, just for the ease of pruning, weeding, and being able to maneuver around um, through the landscape. And anything that would need divided at some point also has a little more room to grow. And let's say something happened in your life and you missed a year that you really should have dug up all of those daylilies and divided them. If you plant them far enough apart, a year's probably not going to make that much of a difference. If they're planted right on top of each other, the time to get on top of those plants and divide them and get them spaced back out is a little more critical. What is the mature size of the plants? And know before you choose. So we talked about right plant, right place when we went through Master Gardener training. And a lot of times, mature size of plants is not what we think. We're going to go over that in another slide here. But make sure that you're doing your research. And if you can, find a plant that has been around for 4 or 5 years and actually see how big that plant is compared to what the nursery specifications say that plant is going to get. I think that's something that a lot of us need to take into consideration. And I have you guys all over top of my words here. So what does the client's future look like? So this is something that before I even look at the house and I'm talking to a client, I want to know what they have coming up, because right now they have a blank slate. So what age are you? You know, we're not going to discriminate on age, but are you going to retire? Are you looking for a hobby? Is this something that you want to do in retirement, or do you want to travel? You know, if you just want your house to look nice and neat and tidy because you and your husband or you and your wife are retiring, and you want to travel because you have family out west or whatnot, you don't really want to have a lot to take care of at home. So maybe we're retiring, but maybe we're picking up with something else that's taking that time. Do we have health issues? And if we don't have health issues, may we have health issues in the next 5, 6 to 10 years? So we take into consideration a number of things before we even start the selection of the plants and the design of the landscape. I have had a number of young couples that bought their starter home and, you know, they're remodeling, they're doing everything. Maybe they had the giant yews that were growing up in front of the house in town or out in the country. You know, affordable first-time homes don't always have the best landscaping. So they go in and they tear all the old out and they want to know, you know, oh, I want all this blooming. Oh, I want all of this color. And then we have to take a step back and say, okay, I think it's great that you guys are ready to do all of this. You have the time and the energy to put into this and work hard on this. But in 5 years, where do you see yourself with your family? Are you going to have children? And if you have children, are you going to have children, several children? And then are your children going to be actively involved in sports, in church, in 4-H? Are they going to be actively involved in the chess club? Whatever it may be, children take time. And so a lot of us, I'm going to speak for myself because I have 3 children. You know, I love to garden and I love to be outside and tending to my plants, pulling weeds, trimming things, deadheading, all of that. But if my son has a flag football game, I'm going to go to his flag football game. And then if my daughter has something for FFA and my other daughter has something for 4-H, I'm torn. My plants probably aren't going to get taken care of that weekend. So we need to really, really plan to be practical. And then, you know, to me, that's almost as important, if not more important than right plant, right place. What stage of life are you in? Where are you going to be 5 to 10 years from now? And how much time do you want to spend in this space? Are you single? I know some single folks that have a more active lifestyle than folks that I know that are married and have children, because they don't have anything tying them down, and they're bebopping from one organization and volunteer opportunity to the next. And they might like to work out in the garden, but they don't have to. So these are things to take into account. So when we talk about plant selection, of course, we talk about the whole right plant, right place. And of course, I've said that 10 times already, and probably going to say it another 10. But proper plant selection is based on a number of factors. So we just talked about, what do our customers really need? Sometimes it takes somebody to say, I know that's what you want, but this is what you need. And we always want to give the customer what they're asking for, but maybe there's a delicate way to say, or help them to realize that they may not need all of the things that they want. So proper plant selection is based on soil type. I live in near Melinta, Ohio, in a little town called Ellery. It's really not even a town, but we call it Ellery. And we have really, really hard clay here. And this clay is the type of clay that they made the field tiles out of. So if you know those orange clay field tiles, this is the clay that they made that out of. Very hard to dig in, very nutrient rich, but very, very dry when it's dry, and very, very wet when it's wet. So it's really, really hard to find the good middle ground in our type of soil. So there may be some plants that really, really do well and thrive in black sand that are not going to do as well in a less drained, heavy clay. So a lot of people will say, well, hydrangeas love acidic soils, blah, 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 so I can't have hydrangeas because I have clay. That is incorrect. They prefer a moist, well-drained, acidic soil, but they will still survive. They may just not be at the optimum health and beauty that they would be in the ideal situation. And that goes for a lot of different plants. And if you guys can forgive me, I've been coming off of a cold here. I'm going to take a sip of something. I feel I'm going hoarse on you, and I wouldn't want to listen to that. So there are a number of different soil types. With OSU Extension, we offer soil testing. And so this would be a great time to get that soil analyzed, especially if there is new construction and the topsoil maybe was pulled away and a new house was built and then the topsoil was brought back in. Whenever we're planting up around a house, it's possible that the subsoil that came out of the basement or the pond that they dug, or the tiling, the septic, whatever, may have gotten put into some of these places. And I think this is a really great time to get a soil test and see the analysis of what is available to those plants. We can manipulate the soil and amend it a lot easier in a large section than we want to just do maybe in the backfill when we plant each individual plant. So this would be a great time to know more about your soil and then to make plant selections based on what you have. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I don't see any in the chat box either, just so you know.
Okay.
I'm looking at that.
Thank you, because I don't know if the chat box would pop up on my screen or not. So, oh, what do we have here? Chat, yes, chat too. Appreciate your time. Questions, food. Good to go. Okay, that's what the chat said. So it did pop up for me. Okay. Then one of the things that we need to think about is available moisture. So if this is maybe a house that's been there for a long time, do we have tile issues? If we plant a plant that has any water seeking abilities, any plant that's dry enough is going to find water. But is it going to be a problem? Sometimes I don't think that it's a problem to have plants near a house because they actually draw moisture away from the foundation for the most part, which is what we want. We do not want water laying up against our foundations because then they fail and they crack and it weeps in through the walls and stuff. So the plants actually sometimes I think are beneficial, probably more beneficial than we think around the foundations of our homes, unless we have an old foundation that is weak. We have old tiling, maybe that's plugged or clogged from tree roots or other past plants that have been there. These plants, you almost need to know where all of your downspouts go, where all of your footer tiles and all of that are before placing your plants and knowing whether they're clean, flowing well, and whether or not they're going to, get filled up with roots from your new plants. Available moisture also comes in the fact that we have, if I look out my window right now, I have some very mature silver maples. I didn't plant them. Obviously, they're mature. They've been there 80 years. Not a silver maple fan, but I do love the shade that they provide on my house. The canopy that goes over the driveway when you pull in is really pretty. But as we know, silver maples are a water-seeking, weedy type of tree. They grow fast, which means that they grow fast, they die fast. So they are shedding branches, and chances are a lot of our tiles are probably plugged up from roots of these silver maples. So if those roots are seeking out water and they're close enough to my house, they're probably also in the landscape bedding. So they're probably robbing the moisture and nutrients away from the plants that are around my house. So in a drought situation, I did find myself watering plants that I didn't think that I would have to water. Some plants that I thought were pretty mature and would be able to survive a drought did not do well. And I do believe that that was because these trees have invaded that space. So available moisture is not always what comes from the rain. It's what's available to that plant given other circumstances. Sometimes we think about plants that are in the shade, and we think that just because they're in the shade, they're going to be more moist. I think that comes into play a lot of times with hostas and a lot of those types of plants. People say, well, they go in the shade. Well, they go in the shade, but they also require a great deal of moisture. And if you plant them underneath trees, and maybe some of you have at the base of trees with some tree roots surrounding them, you'll notice that they really don't seem to thrive as well as if they're in the open and have adequate moisture. Is there an overhang? We talked about that space between the building and the sidewalk where maybe it's only about 24 inches and maybe there's a large overhang. The soffit from the house hangs over, or a porch. And so the rain basically has a very hard time getting under there and providing adequate moisture to those plants. We do see that quite a bit. So does anybody have any questions about that? Okay.
Again, if you called in by phone, if you need to unmute yourself, it's *6. So if you are on the phone having trouble muting or unmuting, *6. All right, back to you.
And I do like questions. I'm not like the person that doesn't like questions. So I do like questions. So feel free to ask anything that you have. Chances are, if you're thinking it, someone else is. Could be something that I forgot to say. I know I talk really fast, so I do apologize for that. I don't know why I do. I think I have a lot to share, and maybe that's why I talk so fast. So the next thing we're going to talk about is plant selection. So we've already talked about the space. We've talked about the soil. We've talked about the moisture requirements or the available moisture to these plants. Now let's talk about plant selection. So when we look for plants, one of the things that we need to look for is the exposure to the sun. I don't think it's a bad thing to ask yourself or your clients or whoever it may be that is seeking your help, if they have ever observed that space throughout the day. So I can look out. I have windows all around my house, just like all of you. I can look out my kitchen window and watch the sun, and I can sit here throughout the day and watch the sun go across my kitchen counter. So I know never to leave bread on there or anything like that because it'll sweat. But I think about that in terms of plant sunlight. And there are plants that people will say, well, that's on the south side of the house, that gets full sun. It might, but I also have trees out here that start shading that plant at about 10 o'clock. And then maybe about 4 o'clock, it's full sun. So it just depends on what may be influencing that exposure. Just because a plant faces a certain direction does not mean that it gets full exposure to the sun, whether it's south or west. East even. I mean, I have seen a number of instances where I thought, oh, okay, eastern exposure, summer or morning sun, afternoon shade, but maybe there was something in the way, a tree or a building of some kind that really did prevent it from getting any sun, so therefore it would be part sun to shade. One of the things we need to think about in those situations, especially like I talk about this tree that I have on a south-facing house or a west-facing house, if I have a plant that is facing south and I have a tree that is shading this plant from the time that it leaves out all the way through the summer, the heat of the summer, and then into the fall, those leaves are going to drop. And then that plant is going to be exposed in the wintertime to full sun. I think that is something that a lot of people don't take into consideration, especially when we talk about evergreens. So a lot of people will say, well, evergreens are shade to part sun. Rhododendrons like sun, but they like shade, you know, all of those types of things. And Cora would like to be admitted. There you go, Cora. So we take into account, but what happens when that plant has been weakened by the fact that it's been in the shade all spring, summer, and fall, and now it is in full sun in the wintertime? Pretty harsh on that plant. It would just be like us, you know, being indoors spring, summer, and fall, and being outside in the wintertime, our skin would not be ready for that. There are UV rays in the wintertime that we may not think about often, but they are there. And then wind and ice. I've seen a lot of times where a lot of plants have been damaged in a landscape because of wind and ice. Ice is not always rain collecting on plants coming from the sky. Ice can happen to a plant that is underneath an eave spout or underneath an awning or a roof line where there's snow up on top of the roof and it melts and it drips. Maybe the eave spouts or the gutters are full of ice and that water cannot get down through there. So it's running over and it's dripping on the plants. I'm sure most of you have seen that where, you know, you take a boxwood or a juniper. They're really known for that, you know, where they get the ice bending and they start falling apart. And a lot of times we see that on the corners or anywhere that those eave spouts overflow. So when I set a plant in a spot, I look up. And if you look up and that eave spout is right directly over that plant, you need to move it. Just to avoid that, because I've seen more than enough times a plant gets to a perfect size, a great shape, exactly where somebody wants it, and then it gets destroyed by ice in the winter. We also have to think about wind. We are in Northwest Ohio. There's really nothing here to block our wind. So our winters are really, really dry and cold. So we might be zone 5 and they've bumped us up to zone 6A or whatever. But in my opinion, it's worse than zone 5 because we don't have the moisture coddling around these plants to, you know, kind of keep these buds and tender tissues moist and comfortable during the winter. They're being harshly dried out every single day. So if you think about going outside and your hands get chapped and your face gets chapped and your lips get chapped and all of that from being out in the wind for just a couple of hours, imagine being a tender flower bud that needs to overwinter all the way from late summer to early summer, you know, or late spring before it can bloom. It's almost a miracle that they survive sometimes in our weather here in Northwest Ohio. So wind exposure and ice exposure are two huge things to think about. Size of the planting area. We've already talked about that. We may talk about it again, but if you do not give the plant enough space, it will not perform properly. And I've seen a lot of people with Annabelle hydrangeas shoved up against a house because they read that hydrangeas stay 2 foot by 2 foot. Well, they don't. Annabelle hydrangeas get 3 to 4 foot tall by 3 to 4 foot wide, and they're a creeping plant. And they will colonize an area, and they look beautiful when they have enough room to expand and grow into their own little colony. But when you try to keep them into an individual plant, again, that's the wrong plant for the planting area. So planting area is huge in plant selection. If there's no way to make the planting area bigger, then we need to look at plants that may look similar, serve a similar purpose, but maybe are a different plant altogether. Level of care and maintenance. So again, we talked about what is our life going to be like in 5 years? What are our commitments? What worst case scenario, how much time am I going to have to take care of this when all of this is starting to grow, mature, and kind of come together? Am I going to have the time to manicure this, or am I going to just let it go? And I prefer to plant a landscape in a way that it can be taken care of in the spring and in the fall, and if you want to, sometime in between, but would only require one good day in the spring and one good day in the fall to maintain. And we'll kind of go through that in another section. But I do talk about, and I'm trying to remember how far it is up here, but I will just, if I don't get to it, someone remind me the difference between garden perennials and landscape perennials when we get to the end, and I will make sure that I explain that to you. Okay, so when we talk about plant selection, we've all heard right plant, right place, right plant, right place. But I always say dwarf compared to what? Okay, so when people pull out an overgrown landscape, the first thing that they want to do is plant things that are going to stay small. Probably 9 times out of 10, they want to plant things that are going to stay small. So I want a dwarf weeping cherry, and I want a dwarf Alberta spruce, and I want a miniature crabapple, and I want this and I want that, and it's all dwarf, miniature, which is fine. And I totally understand the the zeal in that, I guess, the want to do that. But I always have to say dwarf compared to what? A dwarf burning bush still gets 8 to 10 foot tall by 8 to 10 foot wide. They can get even bigger than that, but a standard dwarf burning bush still gets 8 to 10 foot tall by 8 to 10 foot wide. So people see dwarf burning bush and they say, oh, I love burning bushes, but they get big. This one's a dwarf. No, this one is the one that gets big. This is the one you just pulled out. You're planting the exact same thing that you just pulled out. But we are so in the mindset when we hear dwarf that means miniature. And in the plant world, it means dwarf compared to what? The parent plant. So if a regular burning bush would get 20 by 20, and this one only gets 8 to 10 by 8 to 10, then this one is dwarf compared to the parent plant. So we have to take into account that dwarf or miniature is a relative term. It is not a guarantee that a plant is going to stay small. And a lot of times they get quite big compared to what a lot of people think they're going to be. I remember my parents when I was a kid. There were 5 girls in my family, and they decided to add on. And so they went to the Andersons and Maumee, and they bought one of this, one of that, one of this, one of this, everything that they thought was cute. And they planted it every other along our house. And it wasn't long before these plants all started growing together. And my mom says, well, that one was supposed to be a miniature. And I remember that being 12, 13 years old. And now I look back on it and I say, well, it probably was, but miniature compared to what, Mom? So we need to look at that and say, dwarf is a relative term, and it does not always mean what we think. Okay. How many of you have planted a weeping cherry or know of a weeping cherry that is a dwarf weeping cherry or a miniature weeping cherry, and the trunk is 12 inches across and the head on it is, we're talking way bigger than what people thought it was going to get. That's a lot of maintenance to try to manicure something into a small space, and then you think about it, that has a trunk this big, which means it has a root system to support a tree with a 12-inch trunk. That's not miniature, no matter how much chopping we do on it. So whenever you have questions about plant size, I would refer to Michael Durr. His Woody Tree and Shrub book has a lot of great information in there about mature sizes. All right. I should give myself a cough drop here. Does anybody have any questions on any of that before I go on to the layout and design? Okay. So when I was in college and I was doing an internship, I worked for a landscape company. And, you know, I learned my landscape design training and technical skills in college, but I've learned a lot by doing and by listening to other people that have done it longer than me. My dad always told me, you know, if somebody's willing to tell you something, be smart enough to listen. And I learned a lot from some people that I worked for. And one of the things that one of my previous bosses had said was, if you can see it, you own it. And I kind of chuckled when he said that to somebody. And they were like, what do you mean? And he says, if you can see their trash cans, they're your trash cans. If you can see their falling down building out back that the raccoons live in, that's your building. If you can see that beautiful woods in the background with the deer that come out at night, you own that too. So not everything that we see is an eyesore, but what are the things that we want to hide? Sometimes we need to look at landscaping as problem solving, you know, not just enhancing the beauty of what we have. Sometimes that comes in the form of shielding the eye or redirecting the eye from some things that are a lot less aesthetically pleasing. So some of those things would be air conditioner units. They're kind of bulky. Let's see, we got a chat here. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Yes, that's a great book. If you do not have one, I know we have one in Henry County's office. Sarah, you probably have one there in Paulding County. Deb, you probably have one in Defiance County. I think all counties should have one of those. He's a genius. So air conditioners are something that, you know, it's a modern convenience. We have these around our houses, but they also have stipulations for warranties and prime operating conditions to keep objects and debris away from them so that air can circulate and flow. But it's not necessarily something that's pretty that we want to look at. So how do we hide air conditioners while not voiding the warranty for our customer? The genius's name and book title would be Michael Durr. And is it Woody Plant? Deb or Sarah, can you give me the name off the cover?
Yes, it is Manual of Woody Landscape Plants, I believe. I'll type that in the chat box.
And I have a she shed in my garden and it's in there, or I would go grab it right off a shelf, but it would take me a little bit to go grab it. But it is the manual that I learned woody plant identification from in college, and I still reference it to this day, especially when we talk about, let's say we're talking about boxwoods, and I come across a variety and I want to know what size that variety is going to grow to. He will list boxwoods, the different species of boxwoods, and then tell you the hardiness, the drawbacks, the disease tolerance, the insect problems, everything that you can think of about those varieties in that book. And it really is just, it's not little. I mean, it's a heavy, big book, but it really is something to have in your arsenal if you're going to be recommending plants. Thank you, Sarah. All right. So air conditioners are a hard thing to kind of hide, but one of my favorite ways to hide an air conditioner would be ornamental grasses. You know, in the wintertime, we're not outside a lot, but the ornamental grasses can be left up in the wintertime. They are blocking the view of that air conditioner all winter. In the spring, we go out, we cut the grasses down. We're usually so busy in other parts of our yard, we don't pay much attention to the air conditioner. And by the time the air conditioner is kicking on while we're outside, the grass is regrown, somewhat covering it. And you just kind of forget that it's there. So, and then it also allows for the airflow that the air conditioner needs. And then it also puts up with the hot air that comes back out of the air conditioning unit. Grasses can withstand that a lot better than woody plants or evergreens or anything like that. As we know, spider mites thrive in dry heat, so we would not want to plant anything like a dwarf Alberta spruce or anything prone to spider mites near an air conditioner unit. Gas meters, electric meters, sometimes we have to be really careful because we can follow the pipes down in the ground, but we don't know which way they go. So there is OOPS, which is 811. And anytime you're going to dig, it is the law, you are to call OOPS and have your utilities marked to make sure that nobody accidentally is into electrical lines, gas lines, or what, I mean, water's well below, but anything that could be harmful or disrupt anyone's service. So that is a free service, 811. And if you call them, they will come out and mark the lines before you do a project. So not only highly recommended, but it is the law. But gas meters and electric meters, as long as they can read, and anymore, most of those are digital. They have scanners from their vehicles. As long as they can make direct contact with a laser or some sort of a device, then they can read those. So those are getting easier for us to hide as landscapers because they don't necessarily have to read numbers off of them anymore. What type of hardscaping is there to meet up with? You know, do we have a blank slate? Is this new construction and the sidewalks aren't there yet? If so, how awesome is that we can help lay out those sidewalks and create, yes, Manuel, thank you, that we can help create those bed lines around the perfect landscaping. I mean, you can create a beautiful landscaping in any setting as long as you really put the thought and effort into picking the right plants for that space. So are we meeting up against a driveway? When someone pulls up and they open up their car door, are they going to hit our plants? Are we going along a sidewalk? Is this a heavily traveled sidewalk like in the wintertime? Is it going to be shoveled when it's snowy? Are they going to salt the sidewalk so nobody slips and falls? So is that going to influence the salinity of the soil of the plants that we're going to plant there? When they do shovel that snow, where are they going to put it? Are they going to throw it in the yard? Are they going to throw it on the plants? Which way is that snow going to be thrown? There are a number. It hardscaping, like bricks and pavers that maybe plants could root into, or is it concrete? A lot of things to take into consideration here, especially, you know, given the heat that radiates off of hardscaping, water that runs off of hardscaping, and then I go back to, you know, the snow and the salt thing, because I really think that that's something a lot of people overlook. And I've been to a lot of places, especially commercial, because when you walk up to a restaurant or you walk up to a doctor's office, they want it to be inviting when you walk up to this medical center. Well, in the wintertime, when you walk up there and it's all gross, slushy, salt everywhere, where's that snow? It's on top of those plants. So those beautiful knockout roses we looked at all summer are now covered in salty snow. So things to think about for sure. Anybody have questions about that? Okay, next. All right, so when we are looking at the design of a landscape, so let's say we've taken into account all of those things that we've talked about, you know, sun exposure, moisture, soil types. What's it going to be like in the wintertime? You know, when that wind is just howling and it's dry for those plants. What kind of hardscaping heat is radiating? Is this up against a brick home? Is this up against a wood home? Is this up against, is it an open bed in the middle of the yard? Those types of things. So then everyone has a preference. My personal preference would be curved and rounded bed lines. Some people really, really like geometric, angled bed lines. I can't say that I don't. It's just not my preference. It's not where, if I had a closet full of clothes, this wouldn't be the shirt I would pick out first. I guess that's the way that I would look at it. You know, everybody has their own taste. So for me, I think it's just more pleasing to see concentric circles kind of woven together. But as I look at this picture, which I think looks really, really nice, there's a pool there, a curved patio. Look at all those plants. There's even some paths there. There's another patio up close to the house for entertaining, a different place. There's even a water garden there. But if you look at it, one of the things that pops out to me, and I think this is because I've done this professionally for a number of years, is that when I design, I want to design so that the person mowing it never has to back up their mower. So we're designing the landscape from the house out, but we also have to design it from the yard in. So when I look at this, does everybody understand that the yard is the light green in the middle? I would hope so. Okay, so this is the yard. So if I was mowing this yard, let's say that this is an acre and a half, and I have quite a bit to mow here. As I am going along, I'm mowing along the curves, and as I get to the patio by the pool, do you see how that kind of has a 90-degree angle right there? Where the patio and the bed line come together? That would be a really, really hard spot to mow. I'd have to back up, go forward, back up, go forward. And eventually I would probably wear out some of that grass. And I would still have to get a weed eater out to weed eat in that section because I would never properly be able to mow that. And then if you go along the curve of the patio and you come along to the other side, we have another one just in the opposite way. So this curve back in here is so narrow that I couldn't get my mower in there. So I would have to get my weed eater out to trim that grass because I wouldn't be able to get my lawnmower in there. And so I look at that and I say, wow, that is beautiful, but that is impractical to me. So anytime you're mowing your lawn, or this is what I've had customers do, you know, when we've done swooping curves, or I've encouraged people to design for themselves, get your lawnmower out and you could paint your bed line first and get your mower out and mow along that, or at least drive along it and see if it is a natural curve for you. See if it is something that your mower can do without having to back up. If you feel that your swoops or your curves are a little too narrow, then you can widen them out. We're still in that process of building the bed line first, which is what I do. I build the bed line and then I build the landscape. So I could design this 15 different ways if I had this blank slate. But I definitely would have picked this line to have picked up off of this bubble on the left of the patio and then off of the right bubble. Do you understand what I'm saying? Can you see my cursor on this?
I can, yes, you can see your cursor.
Okay, so if you want to stay unmuted, Sarah?
Sure.
Okay, so if I am mowing along this curve, following my cursor, and I go around this curve, I want to actually meet up with this one. You see how I would carve that out?
Yeah.
So everything to the right of my cursor would be gone as far as grass goes. And then everything above my cursor here would basically be gone. Because that would be, you couldn't mow that.
One thing I always said is if you have your 12-year-old mowing and they're not the greatest with the mower yet, think about that also with those curves and those different things.
Yeah, what can you stand to lose in that area? That's very smart. Do you mind if I grab a cough drop real quick?
No, you're fine.
Okay,
We
thank
can
you. I feel
pause,
like,
we can pause the recording too.
okay, that'd be great. That'd be great.
All right.
Okay. All right. So, oh, so somebody said thanks for using the cursor, makes it perfectly clear. Okay, I'm glad that you can see my cursor because I wasn't sure if you could. Let me go back. So what I might do, instead of just filling that space with more plants, I might take, let's say that I curve this to be on this bubble here. I might take this and widen this bubble out and eliminate some of these plants and do something a little more dramatic there, so that I'm not just adding more plants to my landscape. You can always reconfigure things, but when I look at this, this would become a problem. That creates more work, and this creates more work. But overall, I look at this and I say, that is just really pretty. And when I have been out at landscapes and not quite sure how I'm going to lay the bed lines out, let's say that this circle, let's say I'm going to keep it. I would stand here with a string or a rope or a garden hose or anything that's flexible, and have another person stand out here, and basically they would walk around me in a circle and we'd paint that circle. Then if I want this to be a concentric circle that meets this one, I'm going to stand here, they're going to stand here, and we're going to paint a circle. And where these two circles come together, so if you look at this, this is one circle, two circle, three circle, four circle. So you can play with that and make your circles different sizes, and where they come in and kind of ebb and flow from each other. So it's a fun thing to play with, and I think it really does look interesting. If you were to be walking along this path, you know, you would be, your eye would follow to the next section, especially when you're coming around a curve like this. You know, you're going to want to see what's coming up here and what's up here. So not to say that this is the way that everybody needs to design, but this is how I feel comfortable, and this is what I lean towards in most situations. Now, if somebody had a very geometric house with really, you know, it was very, very clear to me that they were trying to make an architectural statement, then I obviously would, you know, and if they were more into something like this, then fine, we can do that. And the easiest way to do something like this is we draw off of corners, okay? Anything that is a sharp corner or a sharp line of sight. So if you can see my cursor, let's pretend that this is the edge of the house, okay? This is the edge of the house here. What we're going to do is we're going to draw a line on an angle from here. We're going to draw a line straight out. We're going to draw a line on an angle from there. So what I do is I take that and I kind of make rays off of those points. And then if in an architectural landscape like this, we want to accentuate that, then we come off of some of those hard lines and we increase the viewer's eye, you know, targeting into that area, which is exactly the opposite on that curved one. So if let's say I had a hard line here and I want to cover it up, that's when I start making that curve, is to soften that edge. When we go to something like this, we're trying to accentuate that edge. So we're actually mimicking here sections that we want to enhance the fact that we have straight lines and angles. But more often than not, we're trying to soften those straight lines and angles. You know, if you think about a house, the windows are straight and square and rectangle and sharp and, you know, very, very sharp and whatever. The siding is sharp lines. The edges of the house are sharp lines. The roof line, the shingles on the house are even lines. So when we take and we add curves to that, that softens the appearance of the house and makes it a little more aesthetically pleasing. But there are architectural designs, you know, houses that really do deserve a landscape like the one that's on the screen right now. But I do feel challenged. I'm not going to lie. When I do something like this, I can create some really cool stuff, but I never really fully feel like, and it's not me. I'm not the one living there. I always told my customers, I'm not the one paying the mortgage payment. I'm not the one paying the property taxes. And I'm not the one that pulls in the driveway every night and gets out of their car and looks at this house. This is your house. So we're going to do what you want. We're just going to educate each other so that we're not disappointed down the road and that we didn't get what we want, or we ended up with a lot more work than what we thought we were going to have. All right. You guys are over top of some words here. So deciding whether to keep existing plants. So when I titled this, it was landscape design and renovation. And I think there's a lot of things to talk about here. I've had a lot of customers say to me, for budget reasons, well, what if we keep this plant? What if we keep this tree here? Or I don't really mind that one, but I hate these. But can we just keep this one? I mean, it really doesn't bother me. Well, do you love it? No, I don't. It just really, but it doesn't have to go. It's fine. And then I've had people say, oh, well, this red bud was my grandma's and I dug it out of her backyard and she died. And it's the only thing I have left of her. There's a lot of pressure there. But how old is the plant? And what is the life expectancy of the plant that you think you might want to leave? So let's say you go through and your husband or the neighbor boy or whoever it is rips out all of these shrubs all in front of the house. But you say, well, you can rip out everything but this one and this one. Okay. So when I walk out to your house, I'm to assume that those are the two things that are staying and that I am to design around those two things. Now, if I walked up to your house and those two things weren't there, I instantly, in my mind, have an idea of what I would like to do with it. But when we have to work around this and we have to work around this, these are the things we're going to have to ask. So is this a plant that's going to live 100 years? Is this and I'm going to go back to the red bud. Red buds only have an optimal lifespan of about 15 to 20 years. They'll live to be 30, 40. I'm not going to say that they won't, but are they going to be healthy and are they going to be vibrant and are they going to be, are they going to have a good shape? Are they going to be half dead? I remember growing up and we had one and it was gorgeous. And then all of a sudden, a third of it died. And then a couple of years later, another third of it died. But my mom didn't want to cut it down because it came from my great grandma. Well, I don't blame her. But if that was in a landscape and we're going to redesign this entire landscape around this redbud and it's already 10 years old, are we better to cut our losses now and to start over with a new one or something completely different just to save $100? So then I look at it and I say, all right, well, or is this a Japanese maple? That's in really good health. Maybe it's a blood good. Maybe it's a weeping Japanese maple in the perfect situation. It gets sun in the morning, great protection in the winter. It's looking beautiful, moist, well-drained soil. It's not going to outgrow its space. It just looks beautiful. I might suggest that we leave it because a Japanese maple grows slowly, but if they're in the right place and they are healthy, they can live to be 50, 60 years old. Probably older than that, but we aren't going to let it. That's just human nature in a home setting. So, I may recommend that we keep something like that, but I'm not necessarily going to be suggesting that on a plant like a spirea or a weigela or something that looks like it's been there for 10 years when for $20 we can replace it and start over from a fresh slate. I've had a lot of people say, well, to save some money. Okay, well, if that is where we need to save money, then we're going to put in smaller plants, or we're going to wait to put in perennials until next year, where we're going to put mulch down this year and then wait till we have money for stone. There are things we can do to stretch a budget that doesn't necessarily mean we have to put up with plants that aren't really optimum. Excuse me. Is the plant even healthy? I have seen some people want to keep a weeping cherry tree and it has borers. Um, maybe half of the graft union is dead and they're pruning shoots that are going straight up out, but there are still some that are weeping, and then it has cherry borers. Probably not something we want to keep. So, a lot of times we'll see graft unions when a plant is planted originally. It's a tricky thing for some homeowners and some even some educated folks to plant trees properly, especially grafted trees, because they don't know which side the graft union's on. They don't know how high above the ground to plant it. But let's say a tree is planted perfectly at soil level where it should be, graft union's facing the right way and whatnot. As time goes on, the soil builds up. So if I had a plant perfectly planted right here, as I've mulched over the years, the soil and all the organic matter is building up, and we come up to about here. Now we're about 4 inches below where we should have been. So to scrape all of that back, many of you have noticed that those roots actually come up to that surface. So how do we do that without damaging the tree? Same thing happens when we have stone. People will put plastic or fabric or whatever they want to put down, and then they put stone on top of it. That tree has probably suffered from having that there, but there is still organic buildup around that, and that graft union could be damaged, especially if there's sprouts coming up, water sprouts coming up, suckers coming up, anything coming off of that graft union. And then will it die and need to be replaced when the rest of the landscape is matured? So we've got, let's say that this is grandma's weeping cherry and we're going to keep it. We're going to give it some systemic insecticides and we're going to do everything we can to save it. It's our patient of the year. And we save it, and 5 years from now it dies when everything else is looking beautiful and really kind of coming into its own, and this tree dies and now we have to replace it. What's it going to cost to replace a tree that is proportionate with the rest of the landscape? Or is it going to look stupid to have this little tiny tree and everything else looks mature? And the reverse of having a mature tree with a new landscape, which I have seen a lot. So I ask my clients a lot of times, what are we gaining by keeping this plant? If it's $100 in your budget, we'll come up with that somewhere else. But really, what are we gaining in the overall look of this landscape and the overall maintenance of this landscape and the longevity of this landscape and the continuity? I mean, everything. What are we doing here by keeping this plant? And then if we do design the landscape around the plant, will we be as satisfied with the final product as if we would have just started over? And I will tell you, as a designer, I've had a number of times where I've gone out and this bush didn't, this shrub didn't bother me, so we'll just keep this one. And I don't know, you can take these out, but let's just leave this one. This one's kind of pretty, actually. It gets little pink flowers. I don't know what it is. So by the time I start renovating this landscape, pulling out everything they don't want, leaving the things that they don't really know if they like, but they don't really bother them, I'm left as a designer with a design that I don't really care for. When I look at a house and I say, we could pull this out here and we could make the swooping curve here, and we could do, a patch of blue, salvia with, we can do a lot of things, but we can't. We can still be creative, but sometimes we're limited as to what we can do if we want to keep some of these plants. And maybe they're substandard plants, but the client is always right. But sometimes I feel like all of us would have been happier had we gone and just started from scratch, if that makes any sense. Sometimes the budgets don't allow that. And like I said, there are other ways to maybe cut those corners or to stretch that budget. But unless it's truly some sort of, beautiful, beautiful plant, I would just start over. And then if it's something you want to save and put in a garden out back, you have a 50-50 shot. Cut it back, dig it up, stick it out back, and you still have your plant. Anybody have any questions? Okay, so now let's say that we have planted our landscaping. I apologize for the coughing. We need to decide what we're going to put down in this landscape to control weeds, to retain the bed lines, to hold moisture around the plants, and to soften the appearance of the landscape and basically finish it off. So are we going to use mulch? And if we are going to use mulch, what kind of mulch are we going to use? So if you look at this bed line here, I think it's very, very gorgeous. This is a natural bed line. This has been cut either by a flat shovel or by an edger. And then the inside of the bed has been scooped out with a flat shovel at like a 45-degree angle to create a shelf for that mulch to sit in. There's no additional cost for edging other than the labor and the time that it took to do that. So if you're doing it yourself, obviously your labor's worth something, but you're not putting out money from your budget to do that. It also keeps grass and weeds from growing into the mulch. So if, once a year you go through with a flat shovel and you re-edge that bed, pull that mulch back and re-edge that bed, it's going to be a fifth of the time. And then if anything did start to kind of grow through there and you're walking through the yard, it's very easy to pull it because it doesn't have a chance to really root very well. So it's pretty easy to keep that that edge maintained for a long time. Now, as we go along, we want to choose this mulch, but we also want to keep in mind that that is also going to build up over time. So as that mulch breaks down, we're increasing the organic matter at the top of the soil level, which some of that will be incorporated into the soil around the roots. But if you think about it, a plant that is planted here eventually will be a little underground. So when we plant and we're going to plant with mulch, maybe we plant a little high, just to know that ahead of time. But when we go to choose the source of our mulch, there are a lot of different options. There's bagged mulches at gas stations, $3 for $10. We see those all over the place. Menards runs a special $2.88 a bag. Typically, bagged mulch is shredded pallets. So if you think about what pallets are made out of lightweight wood that really isn't good for much of anything else. So cottonwoods, probably silver maples, a lot of hackberry, things like that are not really dense wood that they can build things out of. So they build pallets out of those. Pallets then go through a shredder and they're shredded and they're dyed and put in these bags. So college professor once said, you open up this bag and it has the remnants of 6 different pallets in it. What was on those pallets? And I say, I don't know. He goes, neither do I. He goes, how do you know that that pallet didn't sit in a puddle of soil sterilizer for a year before it was shredded and put in that bag? Now, he's not suggesting that that's what happened, but it does make you think about, maybe you don't really know the origin of the product that you're putting down. And cheap mulch sounds really good, but maybe you do get what you're paying for. So the other alternative to cheap mulch is free mulch, right? We have all these municipalities that are yard waste facilities and refuse sites for their towns, for the municipalities. So you go and you take your tree branches after a storm and you take them to the city refuse site. And then you pull your weeds and you throw them in the back of the truck and take them to your refuse site. Then you have a tree that dies and you don't know why, but you cut it down and you take it to the refuse site. Then so what happens is, if you took a diseased plant to the refuse site, how many other people did? Sometimes it's not a big deal. And really, I probably make more of a deal of it than I should. But there are soil-borne diseases that are spread through debris, and once it's in your soil, it's there. So if you go to the city refuse site and somebody had a tree that died of verticillium wilt, and they bring that tree to the compost site and they shred it up, and you bring that compost back and you put it underneath your Japanese maple, and you wonder why your Japanese maple's dying from something that looks like verticillium wilt, it's probably not going to be wise to replace that with another Japanese maple because it's in the soil. So for me, it is really hard. There's an application for municipal mulch. Don't get me wrong. If it's a flower bed in the city where they just plant petunias in it every year, mulch it with municipal mulch. I mean, there's nothing bad that's going to happen there. But if you're putting it in something like a home landscape that's going to be there for the next 100 years, I probably would spend the money on good hardwood mulch. Now, hardwood mulch from a good source comes from a sawmill. So when you go out and you're a logger and you go out to a wood lot and you bring these trees back, do you bring back diseased trees? No. Do you bring back healthy trees? Yes. Do you bring back rotten trees? No. So they're bringing back the prime healthy trees from a woodlot so that they can use that lumber as prime quality lumber, veneer, other wood materials, and then all of their scraps are being pulverized in a tub grinder and then either dyed or composted to make hardwood mulch. I feel much more safe in recommending hardwood mulch that came from a sawmill than I do bag mulch from the gas station or municipal mulch from the city. And I know that a lot of municipalities would probably not like that I have that to say, but I think there is a practical use for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there isn't a use for it. I just think we need to take that into account if we're trying to source some of our materials.
Stephanie, I think that's a good point
Yes.
to make on the municipal mulch. Funny story, when I was teaching high school agriculture, our school wanted us to use that municipal mulch. And about a week later, all my students had poison ivy. And so that's the other one that I always caution people when you're looking at that municipal mulch is, again, whatever is put in there. And I had some very unhappy students and parents, and it wasn't fun when you think about that. So that's just one other thing I think of with the municipal mulch.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point. Whatever's in there is what you're getting, and you don't know. And so you get what you pay for. So, if that's the way that someone chooses to stretch their budget, well, I'm not going to buy mulch, I'm going to use municipal mulch. Okay, well, these are the risks. We are going to tell you these are the potential risks. And if you choose to do that, then that was an educated choice on your part. And I think that education is a huge part of that. I'm not going to spend $2,000 on new plants to then go get free mulch to then have a problem for the next 80 years of my life. I mean, it's just not, but there are people that are willing to risk it. So, or risk the poison ivy. So, and then whatever what other weeds came with it. All right. So that's kind of my spiel on mulch. Anybody have questions on mulch? Okay. Okay, so now we're on to stone and gravel. So there's a lot to think about when we talk about stone and gravel. Okay, so stone is very heavy. I mean, if you think about it, if you take a scoop of mulch versus a scoop of stone, the same volume, there's a significant difference in weight. So if you take that per square inch around that plant, plants need just as much oxygen at the root as they need water. I mean, it's just as vital to them as water. So if a plant is suffocating because it can't get enough oxygen, that plant is not going to grow well. So when we take plastic, and I see people do it all the time, they use plastic. Well, I can go to the hardware and get, 7 mil visqueen and use that instead of this really expensive landscape fabric. Well, the landscape fabric is woven, and that woven fabric allows air exchange at the root. So when you have that air exchange, that plant can breathe. If you put plastic down and then put your stone on top of it, you're basically creating an anaerobic environment where nothing can breathe. Those roots are going to suffocate. The water, the moisture that does sit underneath that plastic is not going to have an opportunity to evaporate. It just creates a really funky environment under there. Plus, if you think about weeds like thistles, thistles don't necessarily need to really be well rooted into the ground. If a thistle somehow started in this bed, it could run, and they do, right between the plastic and the soil. There's a nice humid layer there, and they will run wherever they can, and they will pop up wherever a weak spot is, which is usually right in the center of your plants. So do I like stone? It depends. I landscaped my dad's house, did a very, what I would call intricate design, and turned out phenomenal. But he is 67 years old and he does not want to mulch. And we did stone. And I said, it's not my landscape. I'm giving you your landscape. He wanted stone. So we did it the right way. We did a great woven fabric. We didn't lay the stone 6 inches thick. We kept it away from the base of the plants enough so that they could breathe. We could water supplementally. But the one thing that a lot of people need to know when they're looking at stone is that it's going to get dirty. So mulch has to be replaced. People a lot of times think that, well, if I have to mulch every 2 years or every 3 years, I'm just going to pay for the stone, get it done in one shot. I'm never going to have to do it again. It's there forever. And if a plant dies, I'll just dig that plant up and replace it. Has anyone ever tried to dig a plant up in stone and replace it? How dirty does that stone get? How hard of a process is that? And it never fits back the same way. There's never enough dirt. It's just it's a mess. So what I tell a lot of folks is weed seeds are blown in. They travel through the air and they kind of nestle down in the stones. So when you look at stones that have been in a landscape for 5-6 years, you can go out and pull it back and you'll see all that dirt in there. And people say, where did that dirt come from? Well, it blew in. Or that leaf on that burning bush that fell down in there that decomposed, and that bug that hit the window and fell down there and decomposed, and all of these things, there's organic matter happening. So that stone does get dirty. And when it gets dirty, that becomes a seed bed for weeds. So it is not a no maintenance solution. It is a lower maintenance solution and really kind of just bides you time until it gets dirty enough that weeds will grow in it. Does that make sense? But with stone, you would have to have an edging to retain it in the bed. And, in Northwest Ohio, there are a lot of different options as far as edging goes. So my favorite one, down at the bottom would be the natural edge with the mulch. So the bottom left down here is my favorite. Because when I go to mow, all I have to do is put my mower tire right here on this mulch and mow around this curve, and I'm done. If I use these blocks, which I see a lot, Menards kind of took the market on those blocks and ran with it. So about, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, everybody started building these raised beds with these blocks, but they didn't put footers underneath them, or they didn't dig a proper base underneath, so they get kind of wonky. We're in Northwest Ohio, so just remember that there's freezing and thawing that happens. So did we prepare the proper base so that in 2 to 3 years, this doesn't look like it's all falling over? And create a lot more work for ourselves to go pull that back out. Now our bricks are dirty, having to redo it. But if I'm going to mow up along this, I can get my deck as close, my tire as close to this as I want, but I'm still going to have to get a weed eater out and trim along that to give that a nice clean edge. So I'm in essence agreeing when I put something like that in that I'm going to have to weed eat when I mow. Now, this top right one is the plastic edging that I'm sure a lot of us, in the 80s and the 90s was real popular. But again, we're in Northwest Ohio. Those metal staples, those stakes that you drive in the ground and it would kind of hold that landscape edging there. They only stay so long, and especially if they've been nudged by a tire on a mower or a ground mole or what have you. They heave, and then a lot of times that black plastic shows and gets hit by the mower and kind of becomes a maintenance nightmare. And this top one on the left has like a buried brick situation going on there, and I think it looks nice. I just don't know how practical that would be in Northwest Ohio in a landscape setting, unless you were willing to spend some time every year releveling that. So, anybody have any questions? Okay. So, one of the big things that I think spurs a lot of people to do a new landscape or to renovate a landscape would be weed problems. I think a lot of people think that if we just rip it all out and start over, we won't have the weeds that we had before. But a lot of times that those weeds, those seeds are laying there dormant. We're not replacing all the soil, therefore the seeds are still going to be there. So some of the products that we can use would be pre-emergent herbicide granules like Treflan or Preen. Preen has come out with an extended release. I think instead of 3 months, it's supposed to last for 6 months. But regardless, a lot of those pre-emergent herbicide granules that we use are only good for about 3 months. So, and that depends on the weather and the amount of rain that we've had. So when a lot of people talk about, well, I put down Preen and it didn't work. Well, you put it down in March and here it is July. So you're asking a product to do something outside of the realm of what it's capable of doing. So we do need to remind people that sometimes these products need to be used in a cycle, not just when we think about it. And then post-emergent herbicides, obviously there's Roundup and there's other chemicals that we can use, 2,4-D and some other post-emergent herbicides for the weeds that maybe slipped through our pre-emergents. And then weed prevention fabric, which I think is kind of funny to call it a weed preventer because in my opinion, it's just a barrier. And it's not a weed barrier, it's a soil barrier to keep the stone from going into the soil. Weed fabric or prevention fabric, whatever, fabric should never be used whenever you're using mulch. Mulch needs to be able to fuse into the soil. It cannot break down properly and improve the soil, and it will dry out. So a lot of times when you see people that have used fabric, I can think of some commercial settings, but you see the fabric and there might be like mulch missing. Well, that's because the wind whipped around that corner and that mulch is dried out because it can't adhere to the soil to stay moist. So when the wind comes, it just poof, 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 a section at a time until it really becomes an issue. So when it comes to mulch, it should just be laid on bare ground. And then there's always mechanical and hand weeding. And sometimes that really is about the best way to get rid of weeds, especially before they go to seed for the next year. And then pruning and maintenance. I think a lot of times people create more work for themselves by pruning plants to be in an unnatural state. So if we look at a boxwood and we say, oh, this boxwood is really pretty, is that boxwood going to grow in a triangle on its own? I mean, maybe kind of, no, it's not. You're going to have to, you increase your level of maintenance by wanting a plant to be a spiral, by wanting a plant to be a box or a ball. The sooner we allow plants to grow in their natural form, the less maintenance we're going to have. So picking a plant that's going to stay within the right size with minimal maintenance is really the lowest maintenance option of all. So does anybody have any questions on pruning or maintaining? Typically when I plant landscapes, like I said, I like for the homeowner to have one good day in the spring and one good day in the fall, cleaning up and putting things to bed for the winter and cleaning up and getting things ready for the summer. Maybe that includes planting some annuals for some color, but realistically, if we're going to spend time gardening and outside, we probably want to spend that time in a garden and not in a landscape. So my last thing that I'm going to say because I reminded myself, was the landscape versus garden perennials. So one of the biggest things that I have noticed, people would come out to the garden center and they say, this is really pretty. Can we put this in my landscape? And I would say, well, this is really pretty in the 1-gallon pot that it's in, but it's going to spread all over. And maybe we want to put this in a garden, because if we put this in the front of your house, you're probably not going to want to spend that much time. If the kids are playing out back, you have a pool out back, your husband's grilling out back, whatever may happen, chances are we want to spend more time in our gardens, and we are more forgiving with ourselves if we don't have that time than if it was in our landscape. So you can always put whatever you want in your landscape, but in my opinion, there are differences between landscape perennials and garden perennials. So a reblooming daylily, like a Happy Returns daylily, is it the most fascinating and exciting thing in the entire world? No, but it has color, and it has color 2 to 3 times a summer, and it really is nice, and it's very low maintenance. So if you want that ruffled, cool, pretty princess something daylily, maybe the best place to put it is out back by your patio where you're going to be sitting there enjoying it, because it only blooms once during the summer. And then put that high color Happy Returns that, it's pretty, but it doesn't really do much for me, but it really does enhance the front of my house. Those types of perennials out front. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
I was going to say, if this is towards the end stuff, if they want to
Yeah.
unmute, or
Yeah,
they can
feel
put
free to
those in the
unmute. Yeah.
star
Unmute.
6 for those of you who are on the phone. I think Steph's had a lot of great points, and so I'm sure there's going to be a few questions.
Feel free to ask any questions that you have. Did I talk too fast in any sections where maybe I wasn't clear about something that I could revisit with you?
Hey, Stephanie, this is Sherry.
Hi, Sherry. How are you?
I was just wondering, I have some plants that I like and some plants that I don't like. I was working outside and looking at my landscape, and I'm thinking, my problem is I have guilt about tearing stuff out. So, what advice do you have for that?
I've been there, and trust me, I still do in my own gardens and all of that. So it's not that I'm heartless. I do have opinions on that, but I think if you look at it, we're all gardeners and we all love plants. So we want to see them do well, and we want the best for them, and we want to be their champion. Like, I pulled this through a rough time and you did a great job, and I'm such a good gardener. But at the same time, like, what kind of plant, for instance?
Well,
Just name one.
there's many, but okay, purple coneflower.
Okay.
They're beautiful in the summer, but right now they look terrible. They're just brown.
Right. And so in a landscape, I probably would not use purple coneflower in a landscape. I would, if you like, if you think about purple coneflower, they're gorgeous when they bloom, and right now they're kind of ratty. So if we were to go towards a plant like a blue salvia or a catmint, nepeta, or something that reblooms consistently throughout the summer, that basically you just go out and kind of cut it back and it redoes its thing, that would probably give you a lot more satisfaction in the landscape. And you could move those purple coneflower to a space where it really doesn't matter right now. That's not the forefront. It's not something that everybody's looking at, but boy, when they're blooming, they are the show. So do you have a bed that you could transplant those to, maybe around back or outside?
I might, yeah.
So maybe walk around your property with a fresh set of eyes. I used to tell my clients, okay, we're gonna turn around and look at the road, and then we're gonna turn around and look at your house as though this is the first time we've ever seen it. Because sometimes when we look at our own properties, we look at the same stuff and we see the same stuff all the time, but maybe we need to take a fresh set of eyes and look and say, you know what? That is a pain in the neck to mow right there. Maybe I could extend this bed and move it right here, and I could plant those purple cone flowers right there. And then maybe I could dig up this phlox and put this creeping phlox in front of it. So now I have spring color, and then I have the summer color behind it, and I don't have to worry about those in my landscape anymore. Something like that.
Okay.
I mean,
you.
I'm not going to tell you you can't keep them in your landscape. Obviously, I mean, if you love them, keep them there. But I do totally understand that they look ratty right now. So I
Go ahead.
typically would not have them in my landscape unless they're maybe around back where I'm going to manicure them a little more, but they won't be in the front of my house. Because I won't make the time to go out there to deadhead them and keep them looking nice if they're out front.
Another question waiting as well.
Yes.
Do you define landscape as the vegetation in the front of the house and then the garden is secluded in the back that people don't see from the street?
Not necessarily. Now, when I say that, I live in the country and I have a distinct landscape around my house and I have a distinct garden area. I have a vegetable garden that flows into my perennial garden. And so that's my garden area. Now, some people don't have that. Some people have, beds that kind of flow from the front around to the back and whatnot. I just think that when you put perennials in a landscape, you have to ask yourself what level of maintenance that perennial really requires to look at its best. Because, like, let's face it, perennials are pretty when they're blooming, but a lot of times they don't look pretty. Sometimes they look like weeds. So we don't want to give the impression that we're not maintaining our landscape for the sacrifice of 3 weeks of color. In my opinion, it would be better to take those that bloom. Maybe it's garden phlox, the tall garden phlox that bloom in August. Maybe I put those around the backside by the steps where you walk in the house, or I put it out back by my garden shed or whatever, so that I can enjoy them when they bloom. But the rest of the year, when they have powdery mildew and they're not doing very well, it's not the forefront of what I'm putting out there for everyone else. I was told one time by a landscape designer, and this could be, some people like this or some people don't, you can agree or disagree, that your landscaping is for other people. Landscaping your house is for other people to look at your house. You are portraying your home to other people. It's a display of my home and how I want my home to look to other people. Your garden is yours. So you put the things that you really truly love and the things that you enjoy back there, but maybe those aren't the things that should be the forefront of your landscape.
I think that's a good point, Steph. Just thinking about like a homeowners association or some of those things, there are certain areas, and I think, I'm guessing most everyone on here is not in a homeowners association where they are required to only put these things in their landscape. And if they have a garden, it's hidden behind a shed or it's hidden, in a fenced in area. And I think that's one thing that I was always taught too, is as we thought about those things, is think about it from that perspective, is it's what others see.
Yeah, and I mean, I can respect someone that has spent a ton of time on beds in their front yard with succession of bloom and all of that. I can appreciate that as a gardener. But as a non-gardener, well, first of all, some people will say, I don't care what other people think. They don't live in this house. This is my house. And that's firmly your right. This is just a way of thinking. I'm just giving you another option. But I drive around out here in the country, and there's some elderly ladies that live probably 2 or 3 miles from me that's what they do. I think they're widowed and they just spend time in their yard and they garden, and their beds are beautiful. But my fear for them is, what happens if they get sick or break a hip, or, those beds are just going to take over and just be overgrown in a matter of weeks because they aren't out there to maintain them. And it makes me sad for these ladies. I feel like stopping by and offering to do that in the chance. But at the same time, if something were to happen and that house was to go on the market, it looks like an awfully hard thing to maintain for a new homeowner. So there's a lot there too.
Okay, there was a couple more questions in the chat box too. I don't know, Katie, if you want to grab those or if you want me, there were a couple before the one.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see who else
Okay.
on here.
I guess I'll start with
So-
the first one.
I'm sorry, did you answer the one on edging?
No, she hasn't done those yet.
Okay, so
Okay.
can you be more specific about how to dig the edge using an edging tool or spade, etc.?
Yes.
And then to
So-
follow that up, someone asked, where do you get the hardwood mulch?
Okay, I see those now. I don't have a whiteboard, but who asked me on the Ann Chase? Is that it? Is her name Ann?
Yes, yes,
Ann, can you see my sheet?
yes.
Okay, so I'm going to do my best to draw this backwards. So if this is the grass, okay, and this is the bed, I'm going to take a flat shovel, so a spade, not a flat shovel, not a flat shovel that has the curved sides like this,
Mm,
just a flat shovel, okay?
okay.
And I'm going to take that and I'm going to slice that right along the grass. So if this is my bed, I'm going to take and hop on that side by side, all the way along here. So I'm just making a vertical slit about 8 inches, about 8 inches from the grass level down into the soil. Then I'm going to take the shovel with the curved sides like this, not a spade, not a pointy one, the flat shovel with the rounded sides. And then
Yeah.
I'm going to come in on a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to take my foot and I'm just going to kind of chisel along there, and it's going to make, I'm going to draw it and then I'm going to show you because I'm horrible at drawing upside down. Okay. So this is the grass. This is your trench that you just dug out. So you just sliced it up and down. Then you came in with your shovel and removed all of this soil.
Ah,
And this is your mulch edge. So you're going to put your mulch right on here into here. And then it's going to be a nice crisp line right here.
and you dig at a 45-degree angle so that
Yes.
it's sloping down away from the grass.
Exactly. Into your bed. It's sloping into your bed. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem. And if you have questions about that, I'm in Henry County. You can ask me anytime.
Okay.
Sarah
And
can
then
tell you that.
where did you get, where do you purchase your hardwood mulch?
Well, there's a huge lack of garden centers anymore. I would say, like when I had Old Orchard, I sold hardwood mulch because I believed in having good quality mulch. I do know that like Mankey Orchards in Napoleon sells the same mulch that I used to sell from the same supplier. I know that there's Wagner Sawmill in Lipsick. They make a really high quality mulch. I'm trying to think out Paulding way. What's the closest place to you guys? Fort Wayne?
Probably Fort Wayne,
Fort Wayne,
Lima,
Defiance, Van Wert,
Defiance. Yeah.
Defiance, I don't know of anywhere that really sells like bulk mulch like that. So I would probably go more towards Fort Wayne. But like Grable area in Indiana, I don't know if any of those Amish sawmills process hardwood mulch or not. I mean, I would think there's money in that. So I would think that somebody does. But I know you guys are in Paulding County, most of you, so I'm not real sure. Sarah, maybe we'll look into that. And we'll
Yeah, I need to look into that
give
because
a
I'm not
we'll
sure
give a
anymore.
supply list out that way. Yeah, I'm quite a ways east of you guys, so I'm not real familiar with, and I know a lot of you guys go into Indiana for stuff, and I really can't think of anybody out that way. Now, Bindings Nursery, is that kind of out by you guys?
Yeah.
They might be,
Yes.
they might be somebody. And if not, I mean, I would ask them, where do you get your mulch? Like, is this from a sawmill, or they probably won't tell you where they get it, but I mean, is it a sawmill product, or is this a recycled product? And if it's a recycled product, that probably, I mean, I guess it's better than city mulch, but I do like a good hardwood mulch that's been ground up. And I don't even care if it's dyed. I mean, it's hardwood mulch, and I don't feel like there's diseases in it. Be pretty hard pressed.
think
What was that?
I think there's one more question that was in the chat box too. The last
Okay,
one from Rebecca.
When you design a landscape, do you start with large specimens first and fill in with smaller plants? What is your process? Rebecca, I think I'm going to develop like a second, like a phase or a second, like landscape 2, volume 2, because I could talk an hour and a half on that. So the simplest way to do that in the most quick amount of time would be, when you look at a house, you need to look for where your focal points would be. So I always place my focal points first. So when you say your large plants first, somewhat. So off the corners of the house, 45 degrees, if I have the room to go 45 degrees, minimum of 12 to 15 feet off the corners for any kind of an ornamental tree. And then when I look at a house that has windows and maybe a section of house where it's just kind of bare and blah, maybe there's room there for something vertical or striking, something like a fine line buckthorn or an ornamental grass. It doesn't have to be a tree. Something with a very vertical, upright appearance. Could even be an upright juniper. Could be a basalt column with water coming down. Could be a number of things. But I look for those vertical focal points first, and then I start to fill in underneath. So if I put an evergreen focal point on this corner, I'm probably going to put a flowering focal point on the other corner, just so that one of them has winter color, one of them has summer color. And then at the base of the evergreen focal point, I'll put flowering plants. And at the base of the flowering plant, I will put evergreens. So I like to kind of, and it's not really the way to do it, but I've thought about how to describe this as, if you walked across a landscape that I designed, it'll go winter color, summer color, winter color, summer color. And so that there's always something going on, but so that the front of the house isn't all green in the winter and no color in the summer, or isn't all color in the summer and all dead looking in the winter. So you have to have a good balance. And I always use masses of 3s or 5s. And so if I have a fine line buckthorn as a focal point, I might have 3 boxwoods at the bottom. And then if I had a small crabapple here, I might have 3 Chamaecyparis, gold mops or something here. If I had something that was an evergreen, I might put 3 woodgilias at the bottom. It just depends. Something that would bloom in the summer, and then something that'll show color in the winter. That was a lot to cover in a really short period of time. I'm sorry, Rebecca. Did that help?
Yes, that was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions?
All right, with that, I'm going to stop the recording.